So a little bit about my background, I guess. I'm at the Michigan State University International Business Center and do business outreach. So my primary goal is working with Michigan business people, getting them up to speed on international, getting them connected with the resources that are out there, like the Chamber, like the U.S. Export Assistance Centers, so the national, local, and statewide resources that exist. And you'll see that there's a lot of resources out there right now, and the idea is that exports assist the economy overall. And there's a lot of great reasons to export. You're obviously all sitting here today, so you've seen some of those reasons and you believe in them. So we won't spend too much time on that. We do a lot of different sorts of trainings. This is focused on, let's see if I can click, investigating and selecting your foreign markets. We do other more basic trainings like an Export 101. We do more advanced trainings. We also do trainings on creating an export plan. So today is not about creating an export plan. It's just about exposing you to some different markets and how you're going to choose among all of those markets. So we give you some opportunities to do some exploring. I had you bring your laptops today because at the end of the session, we are going to be creating our own individualized tools for market selection. And so make sure your batteries last until the end or get plugged in, because that's when that's going to become important, and that's why I sent around that Excel document that you're downloading. You'll use that in order to create your tools at the end. With that, we'll let Sarah introduce herself now, and because she's going to be speaking partway in this morning. We're going to, I'm glad we got started a little bit earlier than we thought, because we'll probably have a lot of questions, and I want to have time to really go in depth into your questions and research what you're asking about. So I'll give you a brief overview of the International Business Center, a little bit more about what we do, overview of exporting, and then we'll look at factors in market selection, and pull up a case, and we'll all kind of do an interactive case together to get started on that. And then we'll look at actual resources that exist, explore those a little bit. Sarah will talk a lot about Global Edge. Who has been on the Global Edge website in the past? Well, you guys are a little bit, right? We were at our workshop.
That workshop.
Yeah, okay, all right. So we'll see the opportunities that are available through Global Edge, and we'll look at all of the other market research tools that are out there. And then at the end, as I mentioned, you guys are going to create your own tool. And if you come back next week, we're going to use those tools to go a little bit further into creating that marketing plan. Okay. So Sarah, would you like to say a few words?
So I'm Sarah Singer. I'm the Assistant Director in the International Business Center. I do a lot of different things. One of them is certainly providing a bit of backup with Jade when we do these types of seminars for businesses. I do a lot of our academic outreach. For example, we work a lot with community colleges, helping them to internationalize their business offerings, business curriculum. And Global Edge is probably the single biggest project that I work on. That is our International Business Resources website that we'll be spending quite a bit of time on this morning. Got a lot of different resources on there, modules, and exporting, FAQ section, and we'll have a chance to look at those a little bit later on.
Great, so thanks. Okay. Any other questions before we get started here? We need a break. We'll factor in a break as we feel necessary as we go through this morning. Okay, so the International Business Center at Michigan State University has been around for 23 years. And our mission is to provide superior education, research, assistance to businesses, public policy makers, academics, and students regarding international business and trade. So my position has only existed for about a year and a half, and that was born out of a need that we recognized to be more involved with the business community. We are very involved at a national level, very involved nationally with federal government, the Department of Commerce, very involved with universities and community colleges all around the country. And we recently realized that we're actually better known in Washington and better known in different places around the country than we were in our own backyard. So we're working to change that and get out there and really connect you guys with the resources we have available. We are a CYBER, and you may have heard that acronym around us before. It stands for Center for International Business Education and Research. So that means we have a grant from the Department of Education in order to further U.S. business interests and make the U.S. businesses more competitive. And we've done that through our Global Edge website, which is an aggregator that brings together thousands of different resources on international business in one place. So most of our Global Edge website is not content that we create ourselves, although there is some of that. Most of it feeds in from a lot of different places to bring the World Bank information, to bring the CIA World Factbook, to bring Transparency International, a lot of governmental, non-governmental organizations, all of that information that they collect into one place and make it easier to access. Yeah. So that's one way we do it. Another way, as I mentioned, we work with a lot of universities and community colleges to help them become more international. We support study abroad programs. Right now I'm working on one in India. Sarah's working on one in Japan. And a lot of language programs as well. We feel that learning foreign languages is really important to U.S. competitiveness abroad. So a lot of different things surrounding that. We also work as the local affiliate of the U.S. Export Assistance Centers. Has anyone been in contact with the USAC here in Michigan? No? Okay, so the Department of Commerce has 3 Michigan offices. We're actually covered by the Grand Rapids office, and Kendra Coe is currently the director over there. There's also an office in Detroit and one in Pontiac. And those are fantastic resources for research, for connections with potential clients overseas, with potential international partners. If you're interested in doing a trade show or a trade mission, they sponsor a lot of those and can connect you with a lot of resources. If you have already identified potential clients or potential distributors overseas, they can vet those companies for you to see if they are actually legitimate before you enter into any sort of large relationship with them. So there's a lot of really great stuff. The MEDC STEP program, as Brent mentioned, this workshop is part of that. It's an SBA program for the Straight Trade Export Promotion Program. And so we work with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation quite closely. We work with the Chamber quite closely in order to further that program. We are the Global Business Club of Mid-Michigan, so once a month, not during the summer, but about 9 times a year, we have monthly luncheons and seminars on international business, and you can come and learn a specific aspect of international business. So last year we did one on IT and intellectual property protection, and we focused on China. So we Skyped in a commercial service officer from the embassy in Beijing and talked to him a little bit about what the landscape looks like in China regarding intellectual property. And you may have already heard it's a challenging market when you talk about intellectual property protection. Yeah. So we do things like that. We sponsored the U.S. ambassador to Singapore last year. He was here for a day, and we did a big workshop and luncheon around him, the National Export Initiative, and doing business in Southeast Asia. So if you're not in Southeast Asia, most companies, traditionally, a lot of companies go into Singapore just because it's a very advanced market. It's rule of law, very similar to the United States, and a lot of companies feel comfortable using Singapore as a launching point into the rest of Southeast Asia. So we came and talked a little bit about doing business in Singapore. We had some Singapore development officials in and some commercial service officers. It's a really neat interactive program. So I encourage you to keep your eyes open for those, and sometimes it's something that doesn't really sound super relevant at the point that the event is coming up. But again, if you can meet someone there, another company, and do some networking, a lot of times that is even really beneficial. So those will be starting up again in September. And we're also the Academy of International Business. So we work with, as I mentioned before, international business professors. We have an association of over 3,000 international business professors from all over the world. And we were just in DC because we had our annual conference. We had 1,200 of those business professors in for a 3-day conference that we sponsored. So that's a little bit about what we do and what our roots are. So why export? Does anyone want to mention or tell the rest of us why you got into the international market in the first place? What about international sounded exciting?
Increased sales.
Sales, right? You've got a set of customers in the United States, and 95% of the world's customers are overseas, or 95% of the world's population. So if you're going to grow, that's kind of the way to do it, right? Because a lot of times you get saturated within your current market, and it's like, okay, if that growth is going to come, where is it going to come from? And it can't necessarily come from the United States. Most of the economic growth that's happening in the United States is via exports, because a lot of our markets are just saturated, and if you look at the growth rate, you hear the word anemic associated with the US growth rate lately. There's not a whole lot of growth happening. There's still quite a bit happening in a lot of overseas markets. So yeah, we want more money. We want to be successful. Why, are there other reasons for getting into international markets? Or why did you become interested in international?
Versatility.
In what way?
Don't rely on the U.S. economy so much.
Okay. So if you are diversifying your customer base and you're working internationally, then if there's a bit of a slump happening here in the United States, maybe there is a growth spurt happening someplace overseas, and that's going to diversify your customer base. It's going to kind of balance out your receipt of payments. Okay, what else? I got involved in international in the first place because I wanted to go to exotic places, right? So I don't know that that's a bad reason to get started. But yeah, it's exciting, it's interesting. For most of us, we do this because we enjoy it. Yeah, at some point, you do get to that phase where you're hopping your next plane and you're sitting in the airport, you're like, I'm doing what again? Like, really? Wasn't I just here? And at some point you get to that saturation point. But for most of us, most of the time, it's exciting, it's interesting to meet new people, try new foods, hear other languages, see other ways of being. And we learn a lot from international customers because a lot of times they use our products differently than US customers do. So finding out how someone else might interact with your product is going to be beneficial in you improving your product. I was speaking with a medical company yesterday, and they were telling me how important that feedback from the customer is, and having really good sales reps that are able to speak with the nurses and doctors that utilize their products and get that feedback, and then they can use that to better their products and make innovations and capture larger portions of the market. So that's really key too. Anything else? Okay, so companies that export tend to grow faster, are less likely to go out of business for some of these reasons we just mentioned. And they tend to pay more to their employees, up to 18% more is what the U.S. the U.S. Chamber of Commerce study said. So that's nice. Exporting gives you customer diversification, sales stability, as we mentioned, lower costs, new innovations, extending your product life cycles. So sometimes a product is obsolete here in the United States, or maybe new legislation has rendered it that you can't sell it anymore in the market. Well, a lot of times it's still possible to sell it overseas, and it's still quite relevant overseas. So in that way you can kind of extend those product life cycles. You can interchange technologies, ideas, share platforms, and really emergence of the best of the best. So when you start interacting with more clients, with more distributors, look at different ways of using your product, and look at what other people are doing, what other companies are doing overseas, you can use their knowledge, incorporate it into your products as well. So there's a difference in having a proactive and a reactive export strategy. So I said, why did you go abroad? A lot of people end up going internationally in their companies because they get phone calls from customers overseas. Right? They might see you on a website, they might see your product while they're traveling to the United States, and they're interested in either purchasing your product or maybe being your distributor overseas. So that's fantastic to do it in a reactive way because you already know that there's some interest there, right? If customers are calling you, you know on some level there's some interest in your product. So yeah, you want to check out Australia if you're getting a few phone calls from Australia. Be a little bit more proactive about it. But the issues with being reactive are that you sometimes miss the best and the largest opportunities. So you might be responding to calls from Australia, and you never got any calls from Malaysia, right? However, if you do a little market investigation, you might discover that Malaysia is a huge market for you and it's larger than Australia. It just depends on your product, depends on what's going on in the marketplace. Yeah? So you might totally miss Malaysia because you're just focusing on being reactive and not looking into what actually the market opportunities are out there. You also don't necessarily see all of the risks. So if you're just reacting to what's going on and a customer is calling you and you're just trying to be really customer service oriented, you go out there and respond to them, you might not actually have done all of your due diligence on that customer that's calling you, and they might not be totally legitimate. There might be a whole lot of restrictions and red tape at the federal level, at the government level, that you are not aware of, and maybe the client that's calling you isn't aware of. And so you begin to ship, and later on you realize, okay, my labeling isn't in compliance, my product is stuck in customs for several months, and now I'm having to pay these fees because it's sitting there in the port. My customer isn't getting the product either, so I'm looking bad. So you've got to do that investigation ahead of time and not just react to what's going on. When you're proactive, you get to set the pace. You get to be the first mover into the market, so you can kind of define your competitive space if you're the first one there, so that's a great advantage. But you also have the first opportunity to make mistakes. So if you're reacting, and maybe you're not following a customer, but you're following another competitor of yours. Maybe a competitor of yours is in a market and you're like, well, so-and-so is there, I should be there too, right? And you just follow along. Well, that might work, but it might not be the best option at the same time. So a lot of things to take into consideration. Okay. So I really like Tom Petty. He's one of my favorites. And so I think of this quote a lot of times when I think about people beginning to go overseas. So there are, depending on who you talk to, there are over 200 countries in the world. Yeah? Different.
New ones starting every day.
Pardon?
New ones starting every day.
This is true. We just celebrated the anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of South Sudan yesterday, I think. So there are new countries that are emerging, and then there are some countries that are not recognized as countries by other countries, right, or by organizations. But however you want to slice it, there are over 200 countries. There's over 200 options about where to go. So you're like, yeah, we're going to export, and you pull out a map, and it's like, and then what, right? So where do you start? So which countries are you going to go to? Which products are you going to take overseas? A lot of people have huge product portfolios. You might have one product, but you might have a whole variety of products. So is it smart to take all of them overseas at the same time? Probably not. It's probably best to start with one product. Again, it always depends. But which products are you going to lead the way with internationally and kind of make your stars ones that are more easy, is that a word? To export, things that have less restrictions, things that are a little bit more neutral sometimes, but sometimes not. So you need a plan. You need to learn some basic exporting information, so workshops like this, other sorts of workshops that exist out there, speaking with consultants, speaking with lawyers, speaking with bankers. International trade finance is a whole other subject, and it's very different than the way things are done in the United States. If you're looking for trade financing, you've got a lot of different opportunities out there. You want to look at your company's ability to export. So do you have the resources in order to do this whole exporting thing? Do you have the excess capacity? You start getting lots of orders from overseas. Do you have a management commitment? And a lot of times, again, that's financial, right? Do you have the money to embark on this? But do you actually have senior management involved and committed to doing this international thing? Or do they see this kind of like a side thing that we might do, and there's not a full-out commitment that this is what we're going to do, and there's not a plan associated with it? It's a little hard to be successful if you're not committed, right, in anything. You want to look at your product's export potential. As I said, some products are a little bit more tricky to export than others because of restrictions. Some of them just don't have the worldwide appeal that others do. For the most part, US products are really well received internationally. Right? And if it does well in the United States, there's a very high likelihood it's going to do well abroad. But again, you need to do your research. It might do very well abroad, but you might need to tweak it. You might need to change your label in order to fit with the restrictions that exist. So the Canadian, if you think about food, we have these nutrition facts things that are required all of the time now on our food products. Well, Canada has a very similar one, but their restrictions are just a little bit different. So the size of the letters is a little bit different than what's required in the United States. And you have to be aware of that. And sometimes they have to be translated into French, and you need to be aware of that. Now, these aren't huge barriers to entry, but they are things that we have to keep in mind. You develop an export plan, and there are a lot of resources that can help you do that. We'll talk a little bit about export plans today, but that's a whole separate topic. As I mentioned, there's a lot of resources out there. So we're here locally, but we work around the state. There is the U.S. Department of Commerce that does fantastic things on a national and obviously international level. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation is very much involved in international as well. And so there's a lot of opportunities. Okay. So I mentioned before, you need to figure out what if you're ready to go overseas, and you need to look at your managerial commitment, your organizational readiness, and your product readiness. So those are kind of the two factors that we consider. Different people break it up in different ways, but we look at it in two different ways. One being your organization. So is your management committed? Are you domestically competitive? So if you're not domestically competitive, bless you, you're not likely to be real competitive internationally either. So if your administrative practices aren't completely solid, what happens is a lot of times those errors or those issues tend to just grow larger as you move overseas. So you need to be solid here before going international. Now, some companies are export-import companies, and that's all they do. So the idea of a local market just isn't part of their business plans. But for most of us, your domestic competitiveness is a key marker. Yeah? Administrative procedures and your current supply chain, as I mentioned, if you're not solid with those things, those problems just kind of tend to amplify once you add on a lot of distance, once you add on 5 or 6 or 7 time zones, you add on foreign languages, it gets a little bit trickier. Yeah? Your availability of internal resources, so your capacity, your financial commitment, if you've got employees that have the time to do this, if you've got employees that are completely committed to international, or if you have employees that they're already completely committed to something, and then you're like, oh, and you can do all of our international stuff too. That'll let you travel, it's good for you.